They laughed when she walked onto the shooting range. Not a chuckle, a roar. Who let Grandma in here? She probably learned to shoot at bingo night. Wrinkled hands. Hunched back, faded windbreaker. An M14 rifle older than anyone on the field. To them, she was a joke. Harmless, out of place. Just a simple old woman playing soldier. But then, something shifted. The way she adjusted her stance. The calm in her breath. The stillness of someone who wasn't here to try, but to remember. She didn't speak. She just raised the rifle. Crack. 1 shot, 3 targets, all down. The range went silent, and someone whispered, almost afraid, "Sir." That was Ghost Recon. She came with nothing but silence. But what if that silence hid the most dangerous skill in the room? Don't scroll. You're about to meet the kind of legend we almost erased. The shot still echoed across the range when she lowered her rifle. No words, no celebration. Just a slow turn and quiet steps as she walked away like nothing extraordinary had happened. But hours before that moment, no one noticed her. She arrived alone. No escort, no uniform. Just a small, silver-haired woman wrapped in an old gray windbreaker walking with quiet purpose under the harsh Arizona sun. A junior officer stopped her near the gate. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." She gave a polite smile. "I know. I just want to fire 1 round. That's all." He hesitated, then waved her through, assuming she'd be harmless, maybe nostalgic. Someone's grandmother looking for a memory. No one paid attention. She moved like someone who had learned to be invisible, and the world, as always, was willing to let her disappear, until she pulled the trigger. Now. No one could look away. Before the shot, before the silence. There was only laughter. It started the moment she stepped onto the firing line. Someone nudged a buddy. Bet she learned to shoot at the nursing home. Another chimed in loud enough for her to hear, "Don't forget your shoulder massage after this, Grandma." She said nothing, not even a glance their way. Her fingers carefully unwrapped the old cloth from the M14 stock. The rifle looked like it had stories. And so did she. But all they saw was gray hair and bent posture. To them, she wasn't a threat. She was a joke. One recruit even handed her an AR-15 with the safety still on. Testing her. She didn't flinch. Just checked, corrected, reset. Calm. They laughed because they didn't know. They laughed because they'd never seen quiet power. They thought she didn't belong. But some people earn their place long before anyone notices they were ever here. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the rifle. The wind brushed across the range as she stood alone. Small, still, forgettable until you noticed how steady her breathing was. How her stance, though quiet, took command of space. She didn't lecture, didn't explain. She just checked the chamber, released the safety, tilted her face slightly into the wind. The recruits kept whispering, nudging, mocking under their breath. But one of them, Louis, the quiet one with glasses, stopped laughing. There was something in her posture, something no class had taught him. He watched as she lowered her shoulders, grounded her feet, and lined up iron sights older than any of them. No high-tech gear, no spotter, just a breath, just a woman, a simple woman. But, suddenly, she didn't look simple at all. She looked like memory, like muscle, like someone who had done this before, many, many times. She didn't pause, didn't hesitate. The moment her breath aligned with the breeze, she pulled the trigger. Crack! A single shot split the air, sharp and impossibly precise. The first target rang. Then, in a strange echo, the second spun sideways. Then, unthinkably, the third dropped with a clean metallic clang. 3 hits. 1 bullet. It wasn't luck. It was something else. Something earned. Silence gripped the range. Jaws slackened. Even the instructor froze mid-step. Someone whispered, barely audible, "That's not possible." Another recruit asked, "Did she just ricochet a shot?" No one answered. Louis stared at the iron sights in her hands. No scope, no tech, just geometry, wind, and memory. This wasn't a guess. This wasn't chance. This was art. And for the first time, the young soldiers didn't see a frail old woman. They saw a mystery wrapped in dust and steel and a past none of them were ready to understand. No one moved. The sound of the third plate still echoed somewhere beyond the sand, but the range itself had gone still, like it had run out of breath. Maggie lowered the rifle gently, as if the moment didn't belong to her. She wiped the stock with a slow, practiced motion, then began packing it away. No pride, no smile, just quiet hands folding memory into cloth. An officer finally barked, "Civilians must vacate this range immediately." She nodded once. No complaint, no argument. She simply walked away. The recruits parted like wind through tall grass, unsure whether they were watching a myth or a mistake. But Louis couldn't stop staring. There was something sacred in how she left. No need for applause. No demand for recognition. She hadn't come to impress them. She had come to remember. And in doing so, she made them remember something too, what real skill looks like before the world gives it permission. Long after she disappeared down the gravel path, Louis was still staring at the spot where she'd stood. Others returned to banter, trying to laugh the tension away. But Louis felt something different now, like the air had changed permanently. He slipped away, heart racing into the dusty archives near the admin office. Old manuals, training logs, discontinued sniper techniques. And then, a page, faded, yellowed at the edges, a photo, grainy black and white, of a woman holding an M14 rifle, her posture eerily familiar. Her face, younger eyes sharp like cracked glass. Below it, a handwritten caption, "Recon Unit M. Carter. Status KIA. Operation Phoenix 2005. Louis whispered aloud, barely breathing Carter. That's her. But the note said she was gone. Killed in action. So, how? How was she standing here this morning? And if she wasn't supposed to be alive, why did it feel like someone had just brought a ghost back to life? Louis couldn't let it go. The photo, the rifle, the stance, it wasn't a coincidence. He dug deeper through documents marked confidential reports, half redacted in black ink. Most of it was blank space. Erased history. But patterns appeared. A unit called Ghost Recon, all female, elite, deployed in 2005, then vanished. One report described impossible shot placement under heavy fire. Another mentioned a multi-target ricochet that defied military physics. And every time M. Carter, listed, then crossed out, labeled KIA, killed in action. But if she was gone, who had fired that shot this morning? Louis sat back, pulse pounding. He realized then some people aren't forgotten by accident. They're erased on purpose. And yet, she had returned. Not to reclaim glory, not to explain. Just to remind the world that legends don't live in medals. They live in the silence that follows one perfect shot. Louis needed more than theories. He needed proof. That night, he accessed the range's security archive low-res visual standard angles. Nothing special, until he switched to thermal mode. There she was, Margaret Carter, small, steady. A single heat signature wrapped in silence. No tech, no external sensors. Yet, in the slow-motion thermal footage, Louis saw everything. The way her body adjusted for wind drift, how her shoulder braced against recoil, how her breathing synced with the shot. Every movement was deliberate, every calculation exact. She had done the math. In her head. Executed what others only theorized in textbooks. It wasn't just the shot. It was the control behind it, the clarity, the calm. Louis leaned back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't a lucky hit, he whispered. This was someone who's done it in real combat, over and over again, and she hadn't come to prove anything. She came to remind the ground who used to own it. By morning, Louis wasn't curious anymore. He was obsessed. He dug into every archive he could access, some legally, most not. He searched deployment rosters, medal recipients, classified after-action reports. But Margaret Carter's name was gone, wiped clean. Until Operation Phoenix, 2005 Unit Ghost Recon Commander, Lieutenant Colonel M. Carter status, KIA. Then, another file. Partial glitchy redacted in layers confirmed kills 23 HVTs. Single-shot execution under fire. Ricochet angle verified. Recommend further study. Buried in the footnotes unit extracted. Commander's status unknown. Unknown. They didn't list her as dead. They didn't list her as alive. They erased her. Because some missions aren't supposed to have survivors. Louis stared at the flickering screen. She had survived something no one wanted remembered, and somehow she had come back, not to speak, but to leave a scar deep enough for just one person to start asking why. The more Louis uncovered, the less sense it made. Ghost Recon, an all-female sniper unit, sent into the worst combat zones missions no one else would take, success rates above 90%, no formal recognition, no surviving records. They weren't just forgotten. They were never supposed to exist. He read whispers in footnotes Ricochet confirmed in combat. Unconventional trajectory. Defies standard doctrine. Commander M. Carter. Strategic asset. Request containment. Request containment. Like she was dangerous not just on the field but off it. Too good. Too different. Too uncontrolled. One file even noted team disbanded, personnel relocated or silenced, commander presumed KIA. But Louis had seen her. Alive, precise, present. Whatever Ghost Recon was, it wasn't just elite, it was legendary. And they tried to erase it, because some truths threaten the wrong people. But now, truth had stepped back onto their range disguised as an old woman no one thought twice about. Louis needed more than documents. He needed to know if anyone else had ever seen what he saw. He approached the senior drill instructor, a grizzled sergeant with eyes like spent gunpowder. Sergeant Louis asked quietly, "Have you ever heard of a sniper who could make bullets curve?" The sergeant didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "I heard stories," he said slowly. "Back in Afghanistan. Troops swore there was a woman. Hit targets around corners. No scope, just instinct." He paused. "But that's just combat talk. Heat gets to people." What if it wasn't? Louis pressed. The sergeant looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time didn't see a rookie. If even half those stories are true, he said she's not just the best marksman alive, she's the last person you'd ever want behind a rifle, and the first person you'd want watching your six. Some legends sound impossible until they reload right in front of you. The deeper Louis looked, the more invisible she became. No medals, no interviews, no commendations. Nothing about Margaret Carter screamed hero, except everything she did. He finally found a restricted medical file, one he shouldn't have been able to see. Buried in the notes was a single sentence: "Survivor exhibits severe PTSD. Refuses all military honors. Requests discharge and anonymity." That explained the silence. That explained the distance. She didn't vanish. She walked away deliberately. Louis imagined what it meant to carry that much skill, and choose not to use it anymore. Not out of weakness, but out of cost. She didn't need parades. She didn't need headlines. She just wanted peace. And maybe to be forgotten. But people like her leave maps in the way they breathe, the way they aim, and the way silence follows them like shadow. She didn't need a name. Her presence was the story. Louis sat alone in the equipment bay reviewing the range footage again frame by frame. Not the shot this time. The setup. She hadn't paced nervously like the recruits. She'd walked to the line once, stopped, looked at the targets not as obstacles but as geometry. Wind speed, 6 knots. Distance 300 meters. Target angle staggered, offset, randomized. No one hit that pattern with one shot. Not in training, not even in theory, but she did. Calm, effortless, silent. Her grip was textbook. Her breath, control surgical. Her shot, impossible. Louis paused the video on a single frame. There, in the reflection off her glasses, You could almost see the trajectory forming in her mind before the trigger broke. She hadn't just pulled off a miracle. She had measured it, timed it, owned it like she'd done it 100 times before. This wasn't improvisation. It was memory, muscle, and a lesson taught without words. Lewis knew the shot was extraordinary, but the weapon, that told its own story. He walked back to the armory, asking for the log on civilian range entries. The M14 she used hadn't come from their stock. It was her own, and that gun, old battered, held together by cloth tape, wasn't just a relic. It was a time capsule. Serial number MX01 stamped beneath the trigger guard ghost unit property. Do not issue, his breath caught. She hadn't just been in Ghost Recon, she had led it. Lewis ran his fingers over the worn metal, the paint chipped, the wood stained. But the feel of it, solid, familiar, like a handshake with history. This wasn't just the rifle of a legend, it was proof she never needed a spotlight. Just a steady hand, a clear mind, and a weapon that remembered when the world tried to forget. By lunch, the story had started to leak. It began with a whisper in the mess hall. You hear about the old lady who hit 3 plates with 1 shot, then another. Some kid said she was Ghost Recon, like the real one. Most laughed it off, just another base rumor. But others paused, thought, because they'd seen something shift that morning. The instructors weren't dismissive. They were quiet, watchful, and when one sergeant asked what rifle she used, another just muttered, M14. Custom, cloth wrap, old school. Lewis didn't speak. He didn't need to. He saw the way eyes lingered on the range longer that day, how some recruits stood straighter, more careful with their drills. Maggie hadn't said a word, but somehow she was already teaching them. Without a class, without a rank, just presence, and respect, the kind you don't earn by talking but by doing something no one else can. And walking away. That afternoon, the same recruits who had laughed the loudest said the least. One of them, Harris, the one who joked about shoulder massages, sat alone fidgeting with his rifle bolt. He didn't look up when his squadmates passed. You all right? Someone asked. He just shrugged. Didn't think it meant anything. I mean, she looked like my grandma. The words hung in the air. Small, empty. Another recruit, Diaz, muttered, she didn't even blink when I handed her that AR-15 with the safety on. Just fixed it, like it was nothing. None of them were told to feel bad. No instructor called them out. But guilt has a way of settling in deeper than punishment. Because it wasn't just a mistake, it was disrespect aimed at someone who'd earned more than they ever knew. And now, every time they stepped onto that range, they'd hear the echo of 1 shot and the silence that followed it. Luis brought his findings to his platoon leader the next morning. Photos, serial numbers, redacted files. Everything short of a confession. The officer glanced at the paperwork, barely skimming it, then chuckled. Ghost Recon, he said, leaning back in his chair. That's just old war myth, son. A name soldiers used to explain impossible shots. But she's just a woman who got lucky. Probably some retired trainer with a cool story. Don't get carried away. Lewis didn't argue. He just nodded and left. But inside, something cracked. Not because they didn't believe, but because they didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to laugh than to believe someone like her could be real. But legends don't need approval. They just wait until someone finally notices what they've always been. Lewis kept searching. He didn't want proof anymore. He wanted to understand why she disappeared. Most files were empty. Some crossed out. Some never meant to be read. But one phrase kept surfacing. Requested silence. No scandal, no disgrace. She walked away, because she'd seen enough, and knew enough to stop needing recognition. She had walked away, not because she failed, but because she'd seen and done what few could carry. Lewis imagined that moment, Maggie stepping off the battlefield not in defeat, but in full awareness that what she carried didn't belong in parades or press conferences. Some soldiers come home needing medals. Others just need peace. And maybe she hadn't been hiding all these years. Maybe she was just protecting everyone from a version of herself the world wasn't ready to understand. Lewis sat alone on the range bleachers watching the wind sweep dust across the firing line. The same place where she'd stood. 1 shot, 3 targets, no explanation. But now, with everything he'd found, he didn't need one. She wasn't chasing glory. She wasn't reliving old days. She'd come back for something simpler. Maybe a ritual. Maybe to remember a version of herself only the rifle understood. Or maybe she saw something in the way those recruits laughed. A kind of arrogance she used to carry, before she learned what war does to people who think it's a game. She didn't come back for applause, just to deliver one silent warning: respect what you don't yet understand. Then, like all the best teachers, she disappeared and let the lesson stay. The next morning, everything changed. A black SUV rolled onto the base unmarked plates-tinted windows. Inside was a single man in uniform carrying a sealed folder. He spoke only to the base commander. 15 minutes later, orders came down from command. Find Margaret Carter, immediately. Invite her back. Full clearance. The range, once echoing with laughter and disbelief, now hummed with quiet tension. Word spread fast. This wasn't just a fluke anymore. Someone important had seen the footage. Someone who knew what ricochet shooting meant. What ghost recon really meant. And somewhere outside town in a dusty little trailer with no name on the mailbox, Margaret Carter sat cleaning her rifle. She wasn't surprised when the knock came. She didn't ask who sent them. She just wiped her hands, stood up slowly, and said, "If this is about teaching, I don't lecture. I show." And she followed them back, not for herself, but for whoever was ready to listen. She didn't arrive in dress blues. No fanfare, no salutes, no medals on her chest, just the same faded windbreaker, the same cloth-wrapped M14. When Maggie Carter stepped onto the range again, the place went silent, not out of protocol, but instinct. She walked like someone who didn't need permission, who understood this ground better than the concrete beneath it. The recruits stood straighter now. No jokes, no smirks. Even the ones who mocked her the first time looked down, unsure if they were allowed to speak. She didn't ask for their apology. She didn't need it. Because the range wasn't about pride. It was about preparation. She looked at the line of young soldiers in front of her and said, "I'm not here to compete. I'm here to remind you, some tests don't need anyone to write the questions." And just like that, class began. Without a classroom. The commander stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We've prepared a demonstration," he said almost cautiously. 3 moving targets. Varying speeds. Changing direction every 5 seconds. No one in active service had ever hit all 3 with one round. Not even with high-end scopes. Maggie looked at the setup. Said nothing. She simply rolled up her sleeves, exposing her forearm. Etched faintly into the skin, barely visible under the sun, was an old unit mark Ghost Recon OS-17. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She walked to the firing line. No tech, no assistant, no countdown. Just a breath, a stance, and one aging woman holding history in her hands. Crack. 1 shot. 3 clangs. 3 targets down. No second try, no adjustment. She lowered the rifle like it was part of her body, then turned to the stunned crowd and said only, "Now you know what the myth actually looked like." No one clapped. No one moved. The 3 metal targets still swung faintly in the distance, their motion the only proof that what just happened was real. One staff sergeant, battle-tested and skeptical, whispered under his breath, "Only Ghost Recon knew that technique." The idea of curved bullets had always been dismissed as legend. Today, it had a face. Maggie stood still for a moment longer, then, without flair or flourish, walked back toward the bench like she'd just finished tying her shoe. The recruits, they didn't dare speak, because when skill is that quiet, you realize how loud your doubt used to be. Even the instructors, the ones who'd rolled their eyes just days earlier, looked down at their boots, not ashamed, just recalibrated. And somewhere deep in their bones, they understood they hadn't just witnessed a technique. They'd witnessed a truth no doctrine had prepared them for. After the shot, someone finally had the courage to ask, "Ma'am, are you really?" But before the sentence could finish, Maggie quietly pulled back her sleeve. Not to reveal a tattoo, not a badge, just a faint, worn insignia, silver and black barely clinging to her skin after years of sun and silence. Ghost Recon 0117, stamped like it had been burned there by time itself. The symbol wasn't listed in any modern manual. Most officers had never seen it, but one man had. From the back of the crowd, a retired general stepped forward slow, shaking his eyes damp. He had been young when she disappeared. He was the one who signed her discharge 20 years ago, because someone above him had ordered it. Now, in front of everyone, he stopped, saluted, and whispered loud enough for all to hear, "Lieutenant Colonel Carter, I'm sorry we let you fade." For a long second, Maggie didn't move. She stood there, face unreadable, eyes fixed on the man who once signed away her name. The general, older now, voice softer than command ever allowed, held his salute with trembling fingers. "I followed the order," he said quietly, "but it was your silence that kept me up at night." The recruits didn't breathe. Even the wind seemed to still. Maggie finally stepped forward, stopping just short of him. She didn't return the salute. She placed one hand gently over his. "Sir," she said, voice calm and steady, "you did what the mission required." Then, softer almost for herself, "But the cost, that was mine." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The wind moved before they did. The general lowered his hand slowly, not out of protocol, but reverence. The kind that comes not from rank, but from realization that the person in front of you carried more than orders ever asked for. Around them, no one dared speak. Because everyone understood, this wasn't history being honored. This was guilt being laid to rest. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't proud. She was just someone who had paid a debt others forgot existed. And somehow, even now, she asked for nothing in return. Only that they listen and not make the same mistake again. The general stepped back, eyes glistening. But Maggie stayed where she was, her voice steady, not loud, not broken, just honest. "I made choices," she said, "choices that saved lives, and choices that haunt me." Her words didn't rise like a speech. They settled like weight, heavy, quiet, undeniable. A few recruits shifted uncomfortably, not because of guilt, but because they could feel it now. The cost, the things a uniform hides, the things a medal never mentions. "I didn't come back for forgiveness," she continued. "I came back because I saw laughter, the kind that forgets what fear looks like, and I remembered being that young. Before I learned the hardest part of pulling a trigger is knowing when not to." No one applauded. They just stood there listening. Because for the first time they weren't hearing about war. They weren't hearing about war anymore. They were hearing what it leaves behind in someone, even when the world stops asking. From the back of the crowd, a young recruit raised his hand, hesitant, almost embarrassed. "Ma'am, why did you come back?" His voice cracked. It wasn't challenge, it was curiosity. Maggie turned toward him, her expression softening just a fraction. "I saw young people laughing at things they didn't understand," she said, "and I remembered being that young once." She paused, looked across the sea of faces full of confidence untouched by reality. "I wasn't here to correct you. I was here to remind you the most dangerous person in the room is usually the one no one notices." That landed harder than any order, because no manual had ever said that, and no instructor had ever dared to. She didn't say it like a warning. She said it like someone who had been that ghost in the corner until the moment the entire battlefield depended on her being right. Just once. The commanding officer stepped forward, his tone quieter than usual. "Lieutenant Colonel Carter," he said, choosing every word carefully, "would you consider training our advanced marksmen? You don't need a title," he added, "but your technique, your experience, it could save lives." Maggie looked around, at the rifles, the uniforms, the eyes no longer rolling in disbelief. She shook her head at first gently. "My techniques were learned in places," she trailed off, "places you hope these soldiers never have to go." Then she turned to the younger recruits, the ones who had laughed, now standing straighter than ever. "But if it keeps them alive," she said almost reluctantly, "then yes, I'll teach." Not because she wanted to be followed, not because she needed validation, but because passing it on was the only way to make the ghosts quieter. As the crowd began to disperse, one of the younger recruits broke formation. It was Harris, the one who'd laughed the loudest on day one. The one who'd handed her the AR-15 with the safety still on. He walked toward her, slowly, helmet tucked under his arm, voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Maggie didn't smile, didn't scold. She simply looked at him long enough for him to feel the weight of everything she could have said, but didn't. "You weren't supposed to know," she answered calmly. "That was the point." Then she added softer than before, "But now you do." Harris nodded. Eyes lowered, not out of shame, but respect, because he realized something. Respect isn't about who salutes first. It's about who shows up when everything's on the line and doesn't need to explain why they were there. She never stood at a podium, never touched a whiteboard, never once said, "Listen up." Maggie Carter simply appeared at the range same time every week. No orders, no announcements, just presence. She'd walk behind a recruit mid-practice, watch their stance for 3 seconds, then say, "Left elbow, drop it half an inch." Or, "You're breathing like you're scared of the rifle." Try trusting it, then walk away, and somehow the shot would land better, every time. She didn't explain the why, she showed them the how, and let them discover the why on their own. Recruits stopped checking their manuals, they started checking her eyes, because Maggie didn't teach from memory. She taught from muscle, from scar, from the kind of experience no textbook was brave enough to print. And that was why they listened. Even when she barely said a word. No one ever put her name on the training roster. She never signed a contract, never got paid. But every Wednesday at 0600, she'd be there, bench by target lane, 3 rifle case at her feet, thermos of black coffee in hand. Some days she didn't say a word. She'd just watch. Other days she'd fix a grip, adjust a stance, or quietly slide a recruit's trigger finger half a centimeter forward, then nod once. That was her yes. She didn't clock hours, didn't count reps. But slowly, something changed. Scores improved. Breath control tightened. Shots that once scattered now grouped like fingerprints. It wasn't official, it wasn't recorded. But every recruit knew. If Maggie Carter touched your rifle, you'd shoot straighter, not just with your hands, but with your head. Because she wasn't just training marksmen, she was shaping calm, and teaching them how to earn their silence. She never gave out handouts, never quoted doctrine. But somehow, every recruit walked away with lessons that stuck deeper than ink. Breathe deeper. Trust the pause between beats. Don't aim with your arms, aim with your spine. They'd nod, unsure at first, but then the bullet would land. When someone missed consistently, she didn't ask what they were doing wrong. She asked, "What were you thinking when you pulled the trigger?" That question changed people. One recruit said later, "That question stuck with me longer than my first failed shot, because under her watch it was never just about hitting the target, it was about why you were aiming in the first place. And if you couldn't answer that, she'd simply lower your rifle for you, pat the barrel, and whisper, 'Then you're not ready to fire yet.' That wasn't correction. It was wisdom passed on like breath from someone who'd once had to shoot, not to win, but to survive. Wednesday, 0600, target lane 3. But the bench was empty. No thermos, no rifle case, no faint scuff marks from her boots on the gravel. At first, the recruits assumed she was running late. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Still nothing. Someone checked the admin board. No notice, no message, just absence. The instructors said nothing, only looked at each other with a kind of quiet dread. Because even without rank or title, her presence had become the most consistent thing on that range. One recruit left a folded note on the bench just in case. "See you next week, ma'am." But deep down, they knew. Some teachers don't announce when their last lesson ends, they just stop showing up because they've already given you everything they had. And when silence replaces their footsteps, that's when you realize just how loud their presence used to be. 2 days later, someone checked the far edge of the range. Past the final target. Past the dust line no recruit ever bothered to cross. There, tucked beneath a smooth stone on the bench at Lane 3, was a folded piece of paper, yellowed, edges curled from sun and wind. No signature, just a short message written in slightly trembling cursive. Don't aim to hit the target. If you don't know why, you're pulling the trigger. Below it, 3 faded initials, GR. No one said anything. They just stood around the note, each one reading it in silence, like scripture whispered between generations. Some folded it back. Some took photos. No one dared throw it away, because that wasn't a goodbye. It was a final correction as precise and quiet as the woman who left it. A week later, something subtle but permanent happened. The metal plaque at the entrance of the shooting complex, once labeled Sandridge Lane 3, was replaced. No ceremony, no speeches, just a new engraving bolted in before sunrise. Carter, 017, Marksman. Range. For those who don't need to be known, but cannot be forgotten. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a quiet correction. Recruits now lowered their voices when passing Lane 3. Instructors adjusted their drills, quoting her lines like "Doctrine squeeze slower," "Respect the weapon." Some still left folded notes on the bench. One simply read, "I passed because of her." Maggie Carter never asked for a nameplate. But when someone shapes you without ever asking for credit, you give them one. Not out of tradition, but out of the quiet kind of love that only real legacy deserves. 3 months after the plaque was installed, the reports started to shift. The base's advanced marksmanship program, once average at best, began outperforming other training centers across the region. No new curriculum, no shiny tech upgrades, just better shooters. Drill instructors noticed it first. More control, more patience, more questions asked before a shot was taken. When asked what changed, recruits all gave the same answer. "We learned from Ghost Recon." Some had never even met her, only heard stories, mimicked corrections passed down through whispers and habits. But something in the air had changed. Not fear, not pride, focus, discipline, purpose. She hadn't stayed to lead the program. She didn't have to. Because real teachers don't leave behind methods. They leave behind mindsets. And Maggie Carter had done exactly that, one breath, one shot, one lesson at a time. A year later, someone added a second plaque. It wasn't official. No one filed a request. No one signed off. But one morning, right beside Lane 3's bench, it appeared bolted to the wood edges, rusting, slightly carved by hand. Some legends are too important to remain stories. There was no name beneath it, no rank, just those words. But everyone knew who it was for. Recruits still sat at that bench before tests, some in silence, others whispering the same phrases she'd once offered. Don't aim if you don't know why. Trust the pause. And when a shot rang out, clean. Crisp, perfect. Someone would always nod and say, she would have approved, because in a place once filled with noise and bravado, her absence had become the clearest sound they all carried forward. By the second year, Maggie Carter's story had stopped being told with words. It lived in the posture of every recruit who slowed their breath before squeezing the trigger, in the way instructors paused longer during corrections, in how no one laughed at simple-looking anymore. She wasn't mentioned in manuals. No curriculum listed Carter method. But everyone who trained there carried her in their stance and the patience behind their aim in the silence before each shot. Some called it intuition. Others called it legacy. But those who knew better just called it her. Because the truest kind of greatness doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't ask to be remembered. It just leaves something behind in people, something that shows up when it matters most. And Maggie had left enough for a generation to stand straighter and shoot with purpose even long after she was gone. They never found her again. No obituary, no funeral, no folded flag, just the stories. The form she fixed. The silence she taught them to honor. And one line carved into wood passed from recruit to recruit like sacred knowledge: let your actions speak louder than your rank. Today, across ranges and bases around the country, instructors still whisper the term ricochet logic, a technique no one teaches officially but many now trust. They don't know who invented it. They don't need to, because every time a young soldier makes an impossible shot, every time someone stays calm under fire, every time a quiet person steps forward and does what no one else can. That's her. That's Maggie Carter, the simple woman. The ghost who never asked to be seen, only to be remembered, in the way they hold the rifle and the reason they choose to fire.